Most horror fans these days are eagerly waiting for the next Silent Hill game or the new Resident Evil 9, which is coming out anytime soon. But for me personally, even though these two games are insanely amazing, I still feel we need more similar experiences every year, because having more options is always better. As a result, I started to search for some new games that are worth mentioning and explaining for you guys. And this led me to the one and only The Sinking City 2. The reason I'm so excited for this one is that it's planned to be a revolution compared to the first game. So even if you don't like the original, don't judge the sequel too fast, because it's been designed to not only elevate the quality, but also expand the gameplay, mechanics, and even storyline. And lucky for us, we had some gameplay footage recently, and I'm excited to break it down for you, and also tell you exactly what this game really is, and what you can expect from it as simply as possible. So without further ado, let's start. Before talking about the new sequel, let me first give you a quick reminder of what the original game was all about. The first game is set in the fictional 1920s American city of Oakmont, and it follows private investigator Charles Reed as he investigates a confusing mystery tied to supernatural forces and madness, but most importantly, a devastating flood. Hence the game's name. The city is a decaying, isolated coastal location suffering from a bizarre, ongoing flood that began 6 months before the game's events. The place is composed of half-submerged streets and abandoned homes, with a very calm sense of despair, which is literally my favorite atmosphere in horror gaming. The creepy side, however, is that the flood is not natural, and it's actually related to a cosmic horror that has driven many residents insane, created monstrous entities, and attracted a mix of survivors, travelers, and cultists. This is expected because the horror here is inspired by the ideas of H.P. Lovecraft, which means that cults are definitely a crucial element in the narrative. The gameplay is mainly about exploration, talking to different characters and searching for clues, with some combat here and there, using both melee weapons and firearms.
One fatal round through the forehead. That's no accident. This was deliberate.
But, as I said before, the sequel pretty much has no direct relation to the original game other than the name and the overall theme. The similarity can be seen in this setting, because here you also play in an American city called Arkham during the 1920s. But the protagonist and the narrative are not connected to the previous game. Once again, the story is mainly about a supernatural flood that has ravaged the area, driving out most of its residents and leaving behind only the most crazy and desperate survivors. As usual, this cataclysmic event made the city seem like a wasteland and has unleashed very bizarre entities. But this time, they are much more powerful and even more disturbing. Environmental storytelling is essential in the game because scattered clues, abandoned buildings, and small details will flesh out the world and its lore, leading you to gradually understand the dark reasons behind this mysterious flood. When it comes to the visuals, The Sinking City 2 wants to prove that it's a big game coming to compete. And that's why the developers decided to use Unreal Engine 5 to build a realistic world and highly detailed characters. with sophisticated designs. The game seems like it's trying to reach the level of popular titles like Silent Hill 2 Remake and even beyond. This is not an exaggeration because Arkham City here is planned to be a sprawling labyrinth of flooded alleys, decaying mansions, and abandoned hospitals. The rising waters also dynamically influence the landscape as you progress, changing how you navigate and revisit areas. For example, flooded streets can require you to use boats or swim in certain sections of the game, which is a very immersive feature suitable for the theme. The survival aspect in The Sinking City 2 is a complete revolution compared to the first game, because if you played the original, you probably know that combat and weapons were not its best features. The developers at that time were focusing a lot on atmosphere and detective mechanics, probably due to their limited capabilities, which led the combat to be pretty rough. The shooting was stiff, the enemy movement was outlandish, and ammo management sometimes felt like a chore, rather than a tense survival element. So it was obvious that the original game wanted to be a detective experience at its core, but the combat got in the way rather than enhancing it. However, in the sequel, this is not the case at all, and the developers this time are very serious about composing a journey where combat is as equally powerful as the exploration part. The new inventory system is much more flexible and lets you collect and store all kinds of resources, including classic guns and cool melee weapons. I say classic guns because the weapons here are compatible with the timeline, meaning that you should expect them to be relevant to the 1920s era, like Tommy guns and revolvers. But make no mistake, it's also expected that encounters here will be very tense and resource-driven, where every shot counts, boosting the survival aspect even more. You can also be sure that you'll face some huge tough bosses across the game, and these monsters are designed based on the creepy H.P. Lovecraft formula, which means they are insanely detailed. So it's really clear for me that the developers are not messing around with this sequel, and they don't want it to compete with games like Sherlock Holmes, but rather games like Silent Hill and Alan Wake.
Due to recent flooding and pandemic, access to all external areas is restricted. For your protection, please avoid contact with anybody that may appear abnormal. Your safety in this new world is our absolute priority.
The reason I'm excited for the sequel is actually the first game, because even though it had several flaws and the survival elements fell short, you can still see an awesome game if you scratch deep enough. The general theme is very creative, because the idea of mysterious floods coming from nowhere is incredibly intriguing when you think about it. This is why the atmosphere here is literally one of my favorites in a long time, and it really succeeds in highlighting that feeling of being in a secluded location, where people were thriving but not anymore. In fact, if you ask me how I want the upcoming Silent Hill games to look when it comes to environment and ambience, I will tell you that this is exactly what I imagine in my mind. The cloudy sky, the rainy weather, the empty streets, and the desperate residents are all elements that remind me of Silent Hill Town. On top of that, the timeline is the cherry on the cake, because you and I know very well that going through a scary experience in the 1920s has a very unique vibe, and it really makes me much more curious to explore the lore. This is one of the reasons why I'm excited for Silent Hill F. The fact that it's set in Japan during the 1960s made me very interested in how the classic vibe will play a role in the atmosphere, and how the story will be influenced by such a bizarre timeline in the Silent Hill universe that we never witnessed before. So, to keep it short, The Sinking City 2 is definitely a game that you should keep an eye on in 2025. And I honestly hope that it will hit the mark, because I want the developers to make more similar games. We can't keep milking Resident Evil and Silent Hill all the time, and we seriously need some competitors. The evil within has already vanished from the spotlight, and Alan Wake's future is full of doubt and uncertainty. So any game that can step up and fill the void should be welcomed with cautious optimism. And who knows, maybe it's the next big thing. Anyway, this is all for today, and keep in mind that The Sinking City 2 is planned to release later this year. I wanted to highlight this game because no one else was talking about it, especially since the studio behind it is small and it's not Capcom or Konami. Please like the video if you loved it, and let me know what you think about this game in the comments below. See you next time.